I learned over time like to be more vulnerable, but I've always not been concerned with people that might like read it and know me and use it as a way to judge me. I was always like, that's less important than the people who know me and look up to me and are gonna feel comfort knowing that I also struggle with this, or I've also been through this. So yeah, and with the art, like social media, we assume that everyone is like laser focused on us, and there's people who knew me my whole life, and I had posted art like several times that it took like a certain post that actually caught their eye to be like, oh my God, I didn't know you draw, you know? And I'll be like, oh, okay, like people are not scrutinizing me as closely as I think.
Mi gente, dímelo, what's good? Welcome to another episode of the Quién, Eres podcast, brought to you by Plural. You already know it's your boy Pavel bringing you another very special episode with another very special guest. If you saw the clip in the intro, you'll notice that we shot this episode in person. This was actually while I was in Miami. I figured I'd take advantage that I'm in town and record some content with some locals. That said, we shot this episode at HGAB Studio. They got a dope setup for all things creative right in Wynwood, Miami. For us, we took advantage of the podcast setup that they had. And shout out to my boy Abraham, who was the engineer in room that was in there doing his Spielberg thing, cutting in between scenes. That's why the episode looking so damn crispy. We do got a dope guest for this week's episode, Reyna Noriega. Before getting into the full episode, let me give you a quick little bio so you got some more context going into it. So Reyna is a visual artist and author. Her work centers around women of color and provides joyful and vibrant representation to instill a sense of hope and pride. Her work has graced the covers of Science magazine, The New Yorker, and thousands of people collect and showcase her art in their homes and around the world. Reyna's work centers around that aspect of our journeys as we seek to rise and be our best, our most authentic selves, so that we can all experience sustainable peace and happiness. To get a full bio, please be sure to check out the show notes and the episode description of this week's episode. Now that you got some more context, let's get into this dope conversation. So I typically start the episode with the buzzword that is authenticity, right? You probably hear it everywhere, but when you hear it, what does it mean to you?
To thine own self be true.
To thy own self be true?
Yes.
Okay. Now, growing up, was it easy to live in that definition?
I think it took time.
Okay.
It took time. I think I had good examples of that. My mom is a very confident woman, very happy in her skin. So I think that was a good model. But of course, there's a lot of noise around you as you're finding yourself and you're in school, and certain things are seen as, a beauty standard that you may not see yourself fit into, or, just different things that come up. But I think over time I've learned to find like what is my unique magic and harness that and amplify that within myself without comparison.
Tell me about the noise. Like, tell me more about that. Like, what noise did you hear or see?
It's everything. It's everything that I thought I had to be. It's my kind of like drive for perfectionism, my people pleasing. It was fear, fear of the unknown, fear of failure. All of that can be noise that kind of keeps you away from your purpose if you're not aware of it, and I think I've been very lucky. Like I pointed out the Shakespeare quote that I got tatted,
Girl, I thought that was you.
But I'm very lucky that certain things have like stuck with me that I've read, even the theory of resistance by, I think it's Stephen Pressfield in The Art of War, or The War of Art, and just how like different distractions present resistance to our goals and our dreams that we don't notice. So gossip, certain addictions, people who are just kind of like always find themselves in the thick of something that's kind of like a distraction. I can't work on my dream because I'm ill, or I'm tired, or I'm fighting with this person at my job. And so when I read that and I started to analyze everything in my life of like, oh, this is resistance. Like this doesn't have to be this way. This is an obstacle that I have to learn to circumnavigate.
Yeah. I think one of the first forms of resistance is often family expectations.
what I've learned in this podcast about authenticity is that we feel like we're our most authentic self when we are rebelling against the version of ourselves that we've been told our entire lives that we can't be or shouldn't be, right? And our family, you know, as much as like they care for us, they just want to protect us, and they often have expectations of how we should show up, what career paths we should follow, all these kind of things. So like, what expectations do you think early on you had?
I think, well, like I said, the perfectionism. I was the child that like didn't talk back. I was the yes kid. I was always the one, like, if something was needed or misplaced, I was just like, I'll get it, I'll do it. And so that became unrealistic as I grew up and wanted to, you know, forge my own path and do my own thing. And I started to realize that I had created this expectation of like, if I even went out one time, it was like, oh my gosh, where are you going? Why are you leaving? Because like, you know, I had let myself be this, like, everyone can depend on me. I'm always there.
And are you the oldest? Because I know you have like...
I'm the second of 4.
Okay.
So not quite the oldest, not quite the middle. I'm just like...
So how did you assume like that role?
You know, it's just because I was the yes kid, and I was the one that was behaved and didn't talk back. And
so you're saying everyone else wasn't behaved?
I wouldn't go that far.
Okay, all right.
But it was definitely a bit different. So
interesting.
Yeah. So as I grew up, and like, I don't think I received so much resistance towards my dreams as much as just like, I couldn't be who I was meant to be while trying to carry everyone else's things.
That's tough.
And so knowing how to like separate myself from that and deal with, as a people pleaser, deal with telling people no and feeling the disappointment, hearing the disappointment, and knowing that ultimately what I'm pouring into myself is for the betterment of my family. And like, it's like, we just have to figure it out.
Yeah. And you mentioned this earlier that like, you had some like really dope examples of just like adults growing up. Like you mentioned your mom. As far as like career wise, like when you started thinking, and like you've alluded to like dreaming like pretty young, like when you thought about life later on, dreaming about career, like what did you think about?
I don't think I knew. I think that I aspired to have a lifestyle where I knew I didn't like structure that much. Like even in school, I was a very good student, straight A student, but I was always looking out the window, and I didn't mind working, but I wanted to be outside. Like I didn't want to be in the classroom. I didn't mind reading. I didn't mind. I'll write as many pages as you want. Just let me do it outside. And so.
And what did you study when you were in there?
In like college?
Yeah.
Psychology. I was supposed to be an art major, and you know.
Not you rolling out.
I just, with all of like the years of excelling at school, my parents, like I said, my parents didn't force their expectations on me, but like I wanted to give them a doctorate or like a PhD. And I was like, I'll just do psychology and, you know, go into psychiatry, and it won't be as like stressful as law or like an actual medical doctor.
So they never told you specifically like, yo, let me nudge you that way. Like you just had it in your mind, like this will make them happy, proud.
Yeah. There were comments of like, oh my, like you should do this. Not gentle, not like,
sure, yeah.
If you choose this, we're going to disown you. Just more so like, you're so smart, you should do this. You know? It's like, in the back of my head, I'm like, I don't know. I'm not called to blood. I'm not called to reading this much paperwork, but I still wanted to make them proud in that way. Of course.
And it's funny because for them, it wasn't, I mean, maybe, right? I'm making up a story in my head, but for them, it probably wasn't even like a nudge. It was kind of just like, maybe they saw a certain part of you that was just like, oh, maybe she'll be successful in this route. Right. But like us young, like we take everything like very literally. Yeah, it's just fascinating.
Yeah, I got to see that when the roles reversed and I became a teacher, and I kind of, you see how impressionable they are, and like, and I'm even seeing it now, like outside of that. I have nieces, I have a nephew, and they're very young, and I'm learning how everything feels so big when your world is like that small and you're that young.
Right.
So definitely, I think that definitely played a role. But my dad was an artist, and so I also got to see the aspect of like he was supporting a family comfortably with art. So
also wasn't just a hobby for him, he was actually, that's really dope.
Yeah, he was an athlete, and when he got hurt, he was able to like, just like me, how I let art be the fallback because I thought it wasn't for sure. Like art was what saved our family when he got hurt. So, you know, he was doing his graphic design, embroidery, and like finding different practical outlets for art. versus like the perception we have that all artists are painters and starving artists until they get discovered or picked up by a gallery. So that was very helpful for me to see, because he did art based on his interests. So he worked a lot with like sports logos and teams and, you know, corporate run t-shirts where he's drawing athletes. So it was very tailored to what he loved, but it was using art, you know, as a career.
So you also had a very early example of like, oh, entrepreneurship is possible. That's really dope. But either way, it's not like you went right into that. Like you, like you
and
were,
it's not like it makes sense now, and I put the pieces together. But it's not like in the moment I was like, I could be an artist. He's successful. It's just you're just seeing things, and it's like little by little building up and making sense.
So you started as a teacher though, when you started like your quote unquote career, like profession.
Yeah, after college. Yeah.
All right, so I always ask people like, all right, their first quote unquote adult job, what was their like swag like? Like, did you go in there with a pantsuit? Like, I would kill to see you in like a black or gray navy. Like,
no, I mean,
how did you show up?
I was driving my coworkers crazy because I was like dressing up, and you know, everyone is like so stressed out, and I was a high school teacher, so the teachers are like exhausted, and I was coming with like my stilettos and like cute outfits, and so it's cool because then the kids are looking up to you like, I want to be her when I grow up. So they're more like perceptive, and you know, so it worked out, and it was good for my calf muscles just walking around the school in heels all the time. But everybody would always ask me like, you're not tired? Why are you wearing that? Like,
right.
But yeah.
But you see, I feel like that's an opportunity for like the first maybe thing of like authenticity versus professionalism, right? Because it's like we're trained to believe that we have to show up a certain way, and there you are being like, no, like this is how I dress normally. Like I just want to show up like this. Like, do you think it was ever met with resistance in any ways?
No, I think that I learned because my job before that, I worked at like a department store, and I used to get in trouble for dress code, but not because I was dressed inappropriately, just because my body was naturally different. So I would get in trouble for wearing a maxi skirt. So I would have a skirt on from here to the floor, but somehow I would be like reprimanded for inappropriate dress code just because I have curves. And so when it came to the students, obviously, like I wanted to be mindful of that, and I to kind of be called aside for things like that. So I kind of learned to still like express myself, but you know, everything is flowy and like loose fitting and all of that. So still bringing in the colors and the styles that I like, but working with kids and high school kids and boys and girls, it was just like, if that's how they felt in a department store full of adults, like I have to just like, even if it doesn't, you know, it doesn't make sense or it's not fair or whatever, I was just like, you know.
Yeah, but how did you go from like, because I think if some people are being reprimanded, they go one of two ways, right? They say like, oh, well, let me change myself so that I don't get reprimanded again. Or you kind of go your route, and then you just start leaning into like how you really want to be. Like, was it an instant thing, or did you start like changing a little bit about you?
I think it was pretty instant because that's also something that I can't control, and that's something I never liked. I never liked attention for my body, even from like men. So like my lady HR telling me that it's like, doesn't like feel good. So it was just pretty immediate where it was like, yeah, like it pissed me off, and I felt like it wasn't fair, but I was like, okay, like this is my body. So
yeah. But it's interesting too, because I love how bright and bold the colors. Like, you know how like when you listening to music, at least for me, it's like the best equivalent. It's like when rappers are living their raps, but like I feel like most of them aren't, right? Like you look at your art, and then you see you in person, you're like, yo, she living her paintings. Like you literally pluck yourself out that and like see you now, you're like, oh, that's really her. But I think often, like especially like professionally, we're trained, at least people on the show, they're like, when they dress up for work, all these things, they don't wear bright colors because they don't want to cause attention, or they don't wear certain colors, certain fits because it's not professional or appropriate. Like, when did you get the confidence to just like?
I took that from my mom. My mom was like that.
I'm not gonna lie, your family is like really fly. Like when y'all be doing little family portraits on like IG on like, I was like, yeah, that's a fly family. My family gotta step it up.
Don't put the pressure on them.
Yeah.
But yeah, and back then when I was teaching, like I found my colorful self a little bit after that, because that was its own metamorphosis. So I was still at that time not fully comfortable standing out that much. Like I was standing out by the fact that I was putting thought and like effort into the way that I was showing up for my students. But I wasn't even fully aware of who I was until I had the courage to leave teaching to really bet on myself and further my art career. So that in itself is like its own kind of like evolution.
Yeah. You almost gotta like bet on yourself on a daily basis.
Yes.
It is tough. What was that like? What were the thoughts in your head during that time when you were just like, should I do it? Should I not? Like, tell me about the anxieties and the thoughts that you had.
That's when I started leaning into poetry. So my first and second book, well, my first book was while I was teaching. The second book, In Bloom, was when I left. And those were kind of like the thoughts that were going through my head. I was like writing it down and documenting it. And I kind of realized that it was reading like short form poems and just like prose. And yeah, it's a lot of asking myself questions and my higher self giving me the answers in like real time. And then like how quickly I choose to incorporate those lessons. That's how quickly the evolution can happen. So it was at the time a very scary time, but looking back, a very beautiful time, because a lot of like the seeds that had been planted were finally given like the proper environment to bloom.
Oh, that's how I feel about journaling. Like I journal every morning, and it's like a energy transfer. Like at some point I just have all this energy and thoughts in my head and I just need to get it out somehow. And I've recently started, so I have an iPad and I just journal there, but I recently started doing like voice notes to myself. And maybe like 10, 15 minutes into it, there's like a moment where it goes from like doubt into like action. And it's just reminding me of like what you're saying. It's just like literally as you get more and more thoughts out of your head, you start to see the bigger picture and like what you actually want to do. Like that stuff is powerful. Like that's one of the things that I'm really passionate about. Like I want to get more people into journaling because I think it's really helpful. Yeah.
And just like analyzing the thoughts and like the things that you're feeding your mind. Because I think I got really intentional at that time. One, of like what I was taking in. So was I taking in things that inspired me or things that drained me or made me angry, or, you know, just being really critical of that. And then also listening to the way that I was talking to myself and empowering myself, and then questioning like, would you talk to someone that you love that way? No. So why are you talking to yourself that way? And like, why are you feeding yourself so much doubt and so much criticism when you could be uplifting yourself? So that was like thinking back to my default thought pattern back then, and how it took like months and months of catching myself and reprogramming to now have a default of like speaking life into myself.
Right.
It's like, it's a blessing, and it's like something that you have to like really be cognizant of.
Someone told me love languages, for example, it's often like we think about how to love our partner or even family or friends, but I never thought about it from the perspective of it's often how we should love ourselves. So like physical touch for me, I'm constantly like just holding my arm, touching my leg, all these things. But a lot of people, words of affirmation, right? We often think about it to other people, but it's like, no, like we have to give ourselves the words of affirmation oftentimes, or whatever that love language is. Damn, so you did a lot of like introspective work.
A lot.
And you're an introvert as it is. So you spend a lot of time alone, just like journal. You're like, get out of my head.
At that time, I had to learn that I needed that as well. And it's not just time by yourself. It's like the time that you're spending talking to yourself and working on yourself, because I spent a lot of time at home drawing or listening to music or watching TV, and there was no progress made. So when I was like intentionally working on myself and intentionally like working through some stuff and reading up some stuff, you know, that's when I started to see the changes that I wanted to see.
Yeah. Something else you mentioned too is just like, one thing is creating, but another thing is like sharing it. Right? Like here you are putting your thoughts out there and you're just like, oh, like this kind of is looking like a short story, poem, something. And you're like, this could be something. But then it's like putting it out into the world, sharing it with other people. Like how nervous were you to like Like, what's the first piece of work that you were just like, hey, and who did you share with? Like, your family? Like, I don't know. Because you're like, are they going to be honest with me? There's a lot to, like, think about that stuff.
Yeah. Funny enough, I started a blog. So I started blogging on, I think, WordPress.
Okay.
And little by little, you know, one person reads it, two people read it, one comment. And then, you know, I started to get more and more comfortable. And then, you know, when I switched websites, I kept doing it on my website. Eventually, I started writing for Thought Catalog, just as like their submissions, whatever. And more, like I started sharing like in longer essay form, the things that I was feeling or struggling with or growing through, and kind of seeing the parallel that other people were also experiencing. And it kind of like, it would help me affirm the fact that I need to do this and I need to share and I need to be a beacon of light and like an outlet. And I can't just like, it's not for me to keep it inside. Like it is something that I'm meant to share and help others. Yeah.
I always tell people, like, as powerful as it is, just like literally transferring the energy, the other powerful thing is finding out that you're not the only one in whatever you're going through, right? I often say that if we don't talk about our experiences, we think we're alone, right? When we think we're alone, we think we're the problem. But we're not the problem. Like, everybody is going through these things. So it's a little bit of like validation, just in a way that like, oh, I'm human, like everything's okay kind of thing. But also you give people hope to like get over it. Yeah, that's really dope. Like this one time I was in therapy, my therapist was like, so I'm sorry, do you think you're my only client? I was like, what are you talking about? She was like, you think I could pay my bills with just you? And I was like, oh, other people are going through things, but it just like put things into perspective and made me feel like normal for the first time.
Yeah.
And I think community, another buzzword, just like people reading a blog, is like another way of validation. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you started with like poetry. When did you start creating paintings? Like, was that or more visual arts?
I've been creating since I was little, and I took a little hiatus when I started doubting myself in like elementary, middle school. So I took an art class.
Started creeping in.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, and I think you hear other kids and they're like, I can't draw. I can only do stick figures. And you're like, yeah, I can draw. But the whole time, like when I was little, I was drawing. Like I just posted yesterday. Like, I was finding my drawings in my dad's sketchbooks, and I didn't see anything wrong with it then. But it's like you start hearing that from other people, and you're like, yeah, I can't draw. Whatever. So it wasn't until 11th grade I took an art class, and it brought back the love that I had for it. And I really kept it going as a practice, but it took a while to be like not only comfortable with sharing it, but also it wasn't until I became a teacher and I started transforming my art into illustrations while teaching. And that was when I kind of learned how art could be used as like an immediate form of communication, similar to my blogs. So I started illustrating. Yeah. So I started illustrating for my blogs, and like the illustrations would have a meaning. Like, you know, I did one that was like attention as currency. And like, I was just practicing some of the themes that I was thinking about and working through as like illustrations. And it was different than like the portraits I had been painting before, and like, you know, just some other stuff. And so, yeah, pretty much when I started teaching in like 2015, 2016, that's when that aspect of creating art and using art as a form of communication, as a form of connecting and building community, that's when that happened.
How many people even knew that like you were working on all this? Like, was the blog anonymous?
No.
Like people, okay.
Yeah. I learned over time like to be more vulnerable, but I've always not been concerned with people that might like read it and know me and use it as a way to judge me. I was always like, that's less important than the people who know me and look up to me and are going to feel comfort knowing that I also struggle with this, or I've also been through this. Yeah. So yeah. And with the art, like social media, we assume that everyone is like laser focused on us. And there's people who knew me my whole life, and I had posted art like several times that it took like a certain post that actually caught their eye to be like, oh my God, I didn't know you draw, you know? And I'll be like, oh, okay. Like people are not scrutinizing me as closely as I think. And the same thing with wearing color, you know, like when you're kind of shy or like not as confident, you think that if you stand out, everyone's judging you and everybody's going to be like, why are you wearing that? And then you wear and you realize that half of the people are in their own head and not paying attention to you.
Or everybody.
And the other people are going to be like so inspired by like what you're doing, and it's not going to matter.
But we just all make up stories in our head. Yeah. Like we think we can predict the future. We think we know what everyone else is thinking. Meanwhile, like most people don't care about what we're doing, or they're not even looking for us. I'm curious, like when that doubt creeps in, is it mostly from like comparison? Like, and if so, like who are you comparing yourself to?
I don't think, well, yes, for art, it was comparison to a certain extent where like I wasn't as comfortable sharing in the beginning because I was always comparing myself to someone who I assumed was better than me or like more classically trained. And so, yeah, so even when I was drawing super realistic and shading and all of that, it wasn't enough. And so when I started illustrating and my style was complete opposite, it was empowering for me because I was focused on having fun and communicating something and not how perfect everything was and how detailed everything was.
When did you switch from that?
That was when I started teaching and when I started illustrating.
Damn, teaching had like a really big impact on you.
It did.
Was it also just like being around the kids and like being sort of that representation for them?
Yeah.
What sort of comments or things did the kids tell you?
Well, first and foremost, like I couldn't let them see me sweat and I couldn't let them see me doubt myself, or else they would also doubt my authority. So there's also that, like the same way that I've learned to think of my higher self as like an avatar and like something that you're playing dress up as this other being. It was the same thing walking into the classroom of like prepping myself that, you know, like you're sure of yourself, you're sure of what you're doing here, you're sure of the authority that you hold, you're sure of the position that you hold. And there's no room for like, oh, but what if they don't like me? But what if they don't respect me? It's like, no, I'm like, you know, you're just talking to yourself like, I'm here to do this and I have to do this. And so, so it kind of helped to not leave that room for doubt. And then watching them and the way they approached things reminded me of that childlike curiosity and like, you know, just not being afraid to make mistakes. Because when I started drawing again in the 11th grade, I was super excited. I was using whatever material. It was fun. And then once I started getting compliments from my classmates, it became like, oh, I have to be better. They think I'm good, so I have to become great so I could become this thing. And, you know, and it just was so much pressure. It wasn't fun. It was stressful.
Really? So did you start creating a certain way to like please what you thought they wanted?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes. And yeah. And so dialing it back and kind of seeing the kids discovering what I'm teaching them for the first time and how they're enjoying it, it just kind of reminded me to also like enjoy it again and just like have fun with it and be inspired by anything and everything. It's kind of
the equivalent to people creating content for the algorithm. Like your algorithm was in real life compliments in some ways. Like, oh, they like this type of person being drawn. Let me continue drawing this type of person. Whereas like a lot of content creators, for example, like they'll make a certain type of videos like, oh, they like the comedy skits. I'm only going to do comedy skits. And eventually you get burnt out. And then you're like, I need to find what I want to do. Despite if it's going to be sold, if it's going to be liked, like I just want to start a conversation, do a certain color palette, whatever it is. But that takes a lot of guts because because you know what's going to slap, but you're like, I don't care. I just want to make this for me. That's tough. And that's the space you're in now.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It took a while. And you learn. I used to hear myself, everything I was making at one point, I needed someone's approval before I could post it. Do you like this? Should the background be this color? And you, like you're saying, thinking of what people want. Okay, so it's National Donut Day. I have to draw a donut because that's what, you know, that's what the algorithm wants.
Yeah. And also, so it's not just in real life, like the algorithm hits you too?
Yeah. I think as an artist too, like, you know, it's just, and I started noticing it in other people and just like how it wasn't really resonating with me. And I was like, yeah, why am I doing that? Like, I need to figure out how to know what I like without the noise of if my friends hype me, if people are going to see it, if it's going to be wildly shared. Like, I want to like it first, and I want to know why I like it, and I want there to be like some connection to me and to my soul versus just like, it's Beyonce's birthday, gotta draw Beyonce.
Because you know that's gonna hit. Yeah. Beyonce on any day is gonna hit. That's funny. I don't know if you listened to Kate Renata, but his album, he had this bar that stood out to me. He said, "You can't be a true self while seeking validation," and it is so true. No matter who, like, if we're still seeking validation, we're gonna be creating with the idea of like, I don't care if I like it, I want them to like it. Whose validation do you think you were seeking? Was it? Well, yeah.
I think we don't realize that we're seeking our own validation and we're trying to find it through people. So in order to feel like you are good enough, you need other people to tell you're good enough. And it doesn't matter if they think you're good enough. It's because when they say you're good enough, then you'll finally maybe a little bit believe it.
Yeah. Wow. I don't know if I'm still seeking validation. I think it's interesting too that we spoke about noise earlier. And I've heard you say that, and even now we're talking about blocking, like actually blocking out noise. Like, how do you do that? You just lock yourself in like a room or like Cancun for like a week? I don't know. Like, because it's probably difficult to create with so much noise. And you're already an introvert. Like, that's probably when you do your best work. Yeah.
I think recognizing what the noise is for you is important. Like, what are those things that seep in and distract you and upset you or cause you to be anxious? Like, what are those things? Who are those people? What are those comments?
Oh, don't say names, girl. Keep it vague.
Oh, but what are those comments that kind of like take you out of your flow and make you like put you in defense mode or put you in self-doubt mode, so that little by little you learn how to block it out? So if it's muting somebody, if it's not following a certain account, if it's not reading certain news at certain times in the morning, and it's those little habits that you're like, okay, so when I start my day doom scrolling,
oh my God,
I'm not productive because I'm anxious.
Yeah.
So you learn to stop doing that and replace it with something else that is better. Is like, like meditation or something, tea in the morning versus the tea,
or coffee in your case.
Tea or coffee. Yeah.
Yo, let me tell you, you know how like, you have an iPhone. You know how you can put like a time limit on apps? So I do that, but then you get the notification, your time is up. Dismiss. I'll be right back on them joints.
You don't put it anymore.
Let me tell you, I had to download an app to block my apps. And I put a restriction mode on the app for like a whole day where I can't unblock it. Like, I have no access to them. That's what I had to do because I have no self-control. And I blocked social media and I blocked Hinge, yo. All of them. It's so tough. It's addicting. But now I'm struggling with like, how do I don't know why you're laughing at me. Laughing with me or at me. I don't know.
No, I just canceled like a membership to a dating app because I realized that like I wasn't interested on going on dates. I was interested in matching, and then as soon as people would message me, I'd be like,
yo,
swipe. Okay, it's like I had no interest in meeting people that way or having conversations or meeting up. I thought everyone who messaged me, I was like, you're weird. You don't know me. Like, why do you want to meet up with me? In my head, and I'll just keep going. And I was like, why am I?
Oh, you're one of those.
Why do I have this?
One of those. Okay.
Why do I have this membership just to like not use it? Because I don't think I'm in the headspace to absorb those conversations and really be present.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I think it was that, and like I play like solitaire. Like I don't really spend. Yeah, I don't really spend. Now you're laughing at me.
I am.
I don't really spend too much time on like Instagram. Like I'm not.
You just say you doom scroll in the morning.
I used to.
Oh, you used to. Okay.
But even so, I don't think it was like. I don't know, because I think everyone uses social media differently. Yeah. My social media, like if you look at my feed, my For You page, it's a lot of like interior design and like hair stuff and like travel stuff. So it's like really inspirational in the sense that I'm like looking, I'm like, okay, I need to go do something so I can do this. It's not so much of like, I have other friends that I've seen their social media is a bit different, where it's like the shade room. And so you're seeing one thing, you're reading the comments, you click on someone who wrote a comment. Now you're on their page, you're putting two and two together that they used to date. And it's just like, it becomes a whole thing. I don't get tied up in that web per se. But when my mind is loud and I need a distraction, it's usually like a game on my phone or like Duolingo, or like I got a Nintendo Switch. So sometimes it's just, I'll play the same like level in Mario Kart over and over. And it's not doing anything besides like distracting my mind for like a little bit.
Let me find out you a gamer.
I used to be.
Really?
I used to be.
What games?
We don't have to go into all that.
Let me find out you about to launch a Twitch.
Maybe one day. But I used to play like shooter games like Halo and stuff, and I used to be really good, and now I'm so bad. I don't know if I'll ever be good again.
I mean, you have a lot of time on your hands now since like cut out a couple apps out of your life. Now, but you know, it's funny because I like even on Hinge or like any of these apps, sometimes I also don't even want to go on dates, but I just like seeing people. Mm-hmm. Same thing with Instagram. Like no matter what it is, if it's like gossipy or even if it's like the most productive of things, it's still like just addicting to scroll. So now that I've blocked a lot of things, I have struggled finding what to replace my time with. Right. So I've started reading. I've started just like going on mural walks. But it sounds like now you're in a good space where you found a lot of things to like substitute your time with.
I think I have too many things.
Like what? What else?
Well, first of all, to create, you need to kind of separate yourself from things. So there's not enough hour in the days to create the paintings in my head. There's not enough hours in the days to write the books I want to write. And then on top of that, I like reading. On top of that, I like playing games. On top of that, there's so many shows that I like to watch. So it just never feels like, and people that I want to spend time with as well, you know? So it's just like, I can't go to lunch, paint this thing, write this thing, read this thing. I just can't. So for me, it's like not enough time.
Interesting. Wait, but let's get back to this gaming stuff though, because I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated because you don't want to talk about it. That's why I'm fascinated. Wait, so you used to play Halo. What? So are you picking up Fortnite anytime soon? No, why not?
That doesn't interest me. I used to like Unreal also, like Unreal on the computer. I used to play that on the PC. It was
PC gamer.
This was a long time ago. That was probably when I was like 11 or 12.
Oh, this is okay. This is a minute ago.
And then as I became the big sister, I was like playing multiplayer games with my little sister and my little brother.
Oh, that's so
and it was
dope.
a lot of like Crash Bandicoot and Spyro and more of like the levels and like adventure games. But yeah, I've tried like Apex and some of the new ones, and I'm just like, there's too many gadgets and buttons, and I'm not killing anybody. I don't know what's going on. Oh, and I loved Modern Warfare. That, like, I would play the story out. That is more recently. That's probably like college.
Yo, that's so funny. I did not know that.
But Call of Duty, you put me online, I'm dying every 2 seconds. Respawn. I can't. It moves too quickly.
Yeah.
I don't know.
These kids are on another level these days too, and they got whole like. I got a friend that streams for a living.
Yeah.
On thing, and I'm just like, it's amazed what people are doing these days.
Yeah.
That's so dope. Anyway, you're not done growing, obviously, right? We're all continuing to work on ourselves. So to wrap up, like, what's the one thing that continues to inspire you to continue being your most authentic self?
I don't think I've scratched the surface of like who I'm meant to be and who I'm meant to help, and like the difference that I want to make in the world. And so that inspires me to like not only level up, but like strengthen my alignment and my intention, because like with more visibility, it's very easy to be pulled by different masters, and I want like my soul to always be the guiding light versus like the aspiration for more money or more visibility or more opportunity or this and that. So I want it to also always come down to like the fact that I have a desire to help people. I have a desire to be a light. And so how can I use the gifts that God has given me to do that?
I love that.
Mi gente, that wraps up this week's episode of the Quién, Eres podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please do us a favor. Like, share, comment. Wherever you're listening to this episode, leave us a rating and review. It's just going to help us in the algorithms to ensure that this episode and these experiences get us heard by as many people as possible. Thank you. See you next time.